we're going to jump through the two main modules within security operations that you'll see as kind of the main selling point and the main interaction with customers. And that will be security incident response and vulnerability response. So a little bit of some fast-paced slideware, and then we're going to jump right into platform and show you some stuff here. Show you what it is, how you would work with it, a couple of quick tips and tricks on success to success, right? Success of use and success of implementation for customer base. So the very first thing we're going to jump right into is a couple of definitions, right? When we talk about security operations as a whole, again, product suite, several additional enhancing pieces like configuration compliance, threat intelligence. We're starting to see some machine learning, predictive intelligence opportunities, as well as some of the suite offerings mature, but it really all centers around these two processes: security incident response and vulnerability response. So it's important to understand, right? Just a very brief review, why both of these. All of this falls within the tool set or kind of operational model of security operations, often shortened to SecOps. If you recall from 2 weeks ago, our conversation on that, on why, really boils down to cost and impact to business. 2021 of all times, right? With all the focus on security, with all the focus on improving security posture and everything, cost and impact of breach is still going through the roof. One of the slides that we saw in the prior deck, based on Ponemon and IBM studies, response really, having that response plan and response strategy really saw cost drive down. Vulnerability side, being able to prevent a weakness from being exploited in your environment before it is exploited, cost deferred. Should an incident occur, a security-related incident occur, having a well-practiced and well-planned response plan drove costs down astronomically. And we can see that. That's really what this entire tool set is looking for, right? We're looking to follow a plan, a process, and a program that allows us to detect, find, analyze, and resolve vulnerabilities and security incidents or events in your environment faster. So in order to do that, we have to understand first what security and vulnerability really is. So some definitions here that I grabbed. You'll see a lot of reference throughout the ServiceNow Security Operations suite to NIST and SANS. Those are two organizing bodies that really set up some standards of control and response within the technology and IT space, if you're not familiar with them already. And one of the biggest documents you'll see really referenced out is SP 800 or Special Publication 800, several versions of that. So we'll see some definitions in here of what is a security incident, right? Really starts to boil down to incident causing harm. Attempt to breach, attempt to compromise, attempt to maliciously change state of a system. And I think the key here, right, is security incident does not have to be and should not be only on breach, right? If we were to really drive in and really start to read the fun bedtime reading documents of the NIST documentation, SANS has some frameworks out there as well, they really drive home the idea of event instead of incident. A security event, things like our firewall has detected malicious traffic, should still be responded to. The response plan and path will be different. I think that's key. I think it's one of the big security incident keys that we really drive home when we talk to this process, right? Getting ahead of the curve, detecting it and preventing it from being a breach is ultimate, right? Should it become a breach, we want some additional planning. And that speaks to the context of why this isn't just standard incident, right? Why don't we just boil this into the incident response the ITSM, ITIL defined incident response program and process? Well, that's because the level of event, the type of event differs, and therefore it requires a very coordinated and specific response program or process. And we'll see that here. So this is the state process, or kind of a picture idea of the NIST defined and recommended state processes within the security incident response. Should we have an event that warrants security context, we want to have good preparation. We want to be able to detect and analyze that quickly, contain it, eradicate, recover it, all goes to, so this, you get the idea here, right? We contain it. And then one of the important steps in security incident response is also ensuring the post. We want to review what we did, lessons learned, and how do we go back and prepare our environment, change our firewall state, change our security posture, add another tool if we need multi-factor authentication enabled, or some of those types of. So it is a recurrent continual loop, but it is much less continual loop than what we'll see in vulnerability. And what does this all boil down to? Really simplifying a very granular state of program. Event happens, instead of having 18 steps, 13 ways, and 14 assignments, we really look to set up a programmatic state flow and process for those events that have occurred. And we'll see some of that in tool. We'll see some of the ways that we can automate assignment based on asset or event type. And we can also drive response through workflows and automations. So then we talk about vulnerability response. And one of the things that I do want to kind of segregate between these two, we can almost in some ways think of a security incident as a reactive program. Something has been detected or something has occurred, therefore go do. Vulnerability response, yes, there's a detection method to this, but the detection, the thing or weakness or whatever that we are detecting is preventative, right? Something is weak, therefore go fix it before we have to react. So vulnerability response is proactively responding to things found in our environment. So to understand that, we take a look at a definition. So ISO standardizations that are boiled into the NIST response, the SANS response flows, the frameworks, really boil down to helping to understand a vulnerability. And in truth, I think we've all heard it, right? It's a weakness, it's bad code, it's a port that's open, right? Does not mean anything has happened, but it could be. And what we're really seeking in this life cycle is to shorten two key factors: the vulnerability period of an organization, time between known vulnerability versus time to fix or resolve of that vulnerability. And then also trying to prioritize that. We'll see even in my own home lab environment how noisy vulnerability response can get because of the granularity of detection. So we look to leverage the ServiceNow platform tool sets, the business intelligence platform, to risk rate, rank, prioritize, assign, and resolve those a lot quicker. So having understood definitions, vulnerability response, finding those weaknesses, assigning, prioritizing, and fixing, and governing that state flow or that process. Security incident response, detecting something happening against our environment and responding quickly and appropriately to that, as well as the governance of that flow. We've seen these in our first deck that we talked through 2 weeks ago, but this all really starts to leverage the ServiceNow platform throughout several modules to make security and vulnerability an organization's effort, an organization's quote unquote problem. And that is simply because it's bigger than the security teams. It's bigger than your security operations centers or your SOCs or cyber response teams. It's bigger than your vulnerability managers that scan, hunt and find these. And it takes an organization to really fix this. So we've seen all of these flows, and we start to get the sense that there's a lot of interaction, platform and external. So just quickly reviewing the organization method of that, right? We get the idea that we feed all of this data feeds from all those tools. One of the things that I like to speak to, security incident and vulnerability response, both in ServiceNow. What is it? It's the orchestration and automation and response engine. We talked 2 weeks ago about that idea of SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response. But what is it not? It's not the detection method, right? ServiceNow still is looking to leverage those tools that are out there that do their thing and do it well. Vulnerability scanners, where there's a lot of investment in ensuring that they have insight and visibility into your environment. We can connect in authenticated ways, credentialed ways to the wide swath of environment that you have, cloud and local. And we can really query into that device, much like we would do with discovery. The key differentiation here, when we talk about ServiceNow discovery and having that capability, as opposed to these additional tools, is these tools have that additional layer of security knowledge. They know what a vulnerability is, what the particular signature or key detection method for that vulnerability is. Something like port is open, and in the Microsoft world, H key local machine reg key has a value of 1, therefore vulnerable. Same thing when we talk about the security incident side, right? Just because I, as an end user, open a command prompt and I type ping Google, that is not a security incident. My tools might see that. Carbon Black, Checkpoint, firewalls, et cetera, might see and be able to log and track that traffic. But now if 50 external users are pinging my services, I want to know about that. Those tools know that signature. Those tools know that aspect of this. But what they don't often know is your environment. You're giving them an IP address to monitor. You're giving them a specific thing to look at. But what you're not giving them is the IT and the business intelligence, right? Asset ownership, risk of asset in your environment, posture, other policies that might be in place. And you're also not governing a response flow. You're simply monitoring state. So all of that, right? We look through that slide deck, we see a lot of complicated interaction, we see a lot of integration, we see a lot of internal and external interaction to platform. ServiceNow has done a really good job with the security operations suite of this obviously high level, but kind of 7-point path to success. You'll notice across, and this is across SecOps, right? You'll see in step 3, we do here mention security incident and vulnerability. That's important in this step path because you'll see that our very first step is service-aware CMDB. So this goes to configuration management, CSDM alignment, some of those protocols and frameworks for asset X, server is a Windows device, is owned by and supported by a specific team. It's internal facing, it's external facing. All of those types of attributes that we can assign to a device are very, very helpful and useful. But the additional layer above that is that service awareness. This group of 5 servers runs our website, runs our business banking portal, runs our, and I'm being careful here and being very generic because service can be defined in very specific ways. But the key here is to understand we're really looking at impact to organization. Because when we talk about a vulnerability and when we talk about a security incident, yes, the incident entry point was a specific thing, device, or endpoint. But by compromising that, the compromise can now become widespread. A very simple and easy example is ransomware because a user clicked a link. Our initial impact or detection is probably a user clicked link, the laptop or workstation that computer was, or that link was clicked on. But the impact very quickly becomes replication of that ransomware across your environment. So knowing what all those relationships are is very important. For customers that are what I'll say as CMDB light, there are still ways to leverage the platform and to leverage device awareness as part of this implementation or the path to success. And it really comes down to a maturity phasing. Oh, you don't have CMDB now? Well, guess what? Those security tools and those vulnerability tools happen to know a little bit about assets, CIs, and devices on your environment or in your environment. Therefore, we can leverage that. So I can't speak enough to CMDB when we talk about security operations. But it's also important to know that there are ways to work within limited sets of data there. So we go from talking about our CMDB, our device and service awareness, to integration. Integration within security operations is very important. Integration within tool, integration external to tool, as we talked about, all of those tool sets. So CMDB, the conversation around that, then the conversation around what tools are you using? How many tools do you have? What are they doing? What are they responsible for? Carbon Black does something specific versus Splunk doing something specific in your environment versus your particular vulnerability scanners. To that, I have actually had customers and consumers of vulnerability response specifically. You might often think, one single scanner does it all, and a lot of times it's not true. I have implemented a customer that used all three key direct integration scanners at the same time: Qualys, Rapid7, and Tenable. All because of mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, sub-customer environments. Maybe it's a customer that branches into federally regulated space, et cetera. So there is capability, and it's important to understand all of those and how those interact. We then get into the real meat of 3, 4, and 5, what we can really do with ServiceNow. Prioritization, enrichment, and governing the response. 6 and 7 are important, but you often find that in a little bit of a more mature customer. Automation of the response, right? Automatic deployment of fix, automatic whitelist and blacklist against a firewall, goes back to integrating with some of those tool sets. And as with anything else, making sure that we can see how we're doing via dashboards and reports. All right, let's jump right in. So I'm going to show you 2 environments only because of demo data and availability of integrations. So I actually have a home lab. I have somewhere around as a scannable endpoint here at home, 50-ish IP addresses that are scannable. No, that's not 50 physical devices. And this is a great idea, an example of how we can leverage that scanner to really query in and correlate all of that. So I've also deployed Rapid7 Scan Engine in my environment. So the first thing that I want to mention here, because of demo, I don't have a CMDB. I have not gone through discovery efforts at home. I have a mid server out there, but I haven't actually set it all up, taken the time to. So I am a customer here that is very CMDB light. But the first thing that we've done on the vulnerability response side is we've set up our integration to our scanner. Some of the key things that we talked about when we talk about integration with scanning environment for vulnerability. What is our interval of scan? What is our volume of scan and how often? You'll see and find that customers will scan segments of their environment differently. This is a high priority data center. We scan it every other day. This is our internal inside of highly secured firewall, corporate environment. We scan it once a quarter. Hopefully they're doing more than that, but because of that, within each of our integration tools, again, I mentioned the 3 key ones: Qualys, Rapid7, and Tenable. The integrations are all very well built by ServiceNow, but there are others out there that are vendor provided, like Tanium. Microsoft now has a vulnerability scan solution that they've written some integration rules for here as well. So not boring you with the details of setting up and configuring the integration, REST API, whatever those needed credentials are. But we govern this through scheduled integration runs. 3 main key data elements within vulnerability response we need in order to leverage the platform as a whole. Asset data. I'm going to say asset generically because a lot of your external tools are calling it asset. Vulnerability data. If you recall the definition that we talked about here, a vulnerability by itself, before we even talk about impact in our environment, is the weakness. It's a weakness on or of asset or group of assets. So we want to bring in that data, right? You'll hear about things most recently, log4shell or log4j, log4x, as they're calling it now. You have some Meltdown, Spectre. We talk about the print nightmare vulnerability of recent. All of those are the vulnerabilities themselves, right? That definition of a vulnerability is going to tell us some key things. It's going to tell us, is it exploitable? What's the risk? What's the public facing, not applied to your environment yet risk? And then your scan data. So we take the combination of that vulnerability and is it on your asset or on your device in your environment? And we build scans with our scan detection environment. So there are 3 key elements. And so all of our integrations really boil down and start with those 3 elements: vulnerability definitions, asset, and scan or vulnerable item. So it's important that those are scheduled according to interval of scanning in a customer's environment and how often they're updating their scan data. So we schedule that. What does that start to look like? We bring in, welcome to demos. They take forever when you don't want them to. So we're going to bring in the very first thing, the vulnerable definition. And I'm just going to randomly pick one here. Just because we're looking at this does not mean that this is in your environment. Right? So we're building a library of known signatures, known things, known weaknesses. This can be vendor specific. This can be more wide. It can be, the CVE, the weakness, so on. And with these comes some baseline risk scoring and rating. We have all heard the press, if we've read any of the technical news around that Log4X stuff. It was immediately rated critical. Why? Because of simplicity of and ease to exploit. I could pass a URL to any public-facing service and immediately exploit that vulnerability. So on the public side, before we know anything about that vulnerability in our environment, we already know that we need to pay attention to it. We have some varying levels of scores, and it's very industry. It's very vulnerability industry. One of the key things we see is common vulnerability scoring system. This is a agreed on industry matrix where our final score from 0 to 10 is computed by way of all of those different metrics. Is it exploitable? How easily exploitable? If it's exploitable, what can it jump? Is it only on that machine? Can we go beyond that machine with that exploit, etc.? And that drives us up to a base score. So we'll see that start to apply. And there's a matrix around the 0 to 10 that equals a none, low, medium, high, or critical. But again, this is just definition. Log4 shell, Log4j, critical because of ease of exploit. So now we bring asset data in. This is a very critical path or critical part of security operations and specifically vulnerability response, because we want to see the accuracy of the device. We want to know device information. For organizations that have spent a lot of time to invest in CMDB, we want to make sure that our scan asset, right, IP address, endpoint target of scan, correlates over to our device in the CMDB to get that extra business intelligence. How do we do that? Again, not diving deep into the technical how-tos of each of these, but within security operations and vulnerability response specifically, we have lookup rules. So these are going to match the raw data coming from our scan to our CMDB through a variety of methods. We can see scripting, we can see field matching, and it's important to understand that we walk through the CMDB. So we find that device in your CMDB various ways, IP address, network cards related to that device, so on. And we correlate that. So I'll give you a view into my environment here. As I mentioned, right around 50 devices. Some of these have the same IP for, such as my core router, shared across several VLANs, but several devices in our environment. Because I don't have a CMDB defined in this instance, you'll notice that they're all unmatched. This is one important factor that I do like to show in a demo, because we can still leverage this data. As I mentioned, CMDB, very important, really starts to build out our vulnerability response program. Really look to drive customers to get your CMDB correct and straight, at least at a minimum, device risk posture and device ownership. Devices is external, is not external, is in DMZ, is not in DMZ, and or supported by group. Something of that nature really goes far. But again, we have the ability to bring in that asset data from that scan data from our scanning environment. And within that, we also can bring in some of that data, such as my Rapid7 environment has this tagged as this is in Jones' home. We might have multiple sites at data center 1, 2, 3, etc. So we can get a very base asset view here. And then the last data element that we bring in within our integration is vulnerable items. So the vulnerable item here is exactly what we just talked about. We brought in our asset. We brought in our vulnerability, Log4j, Log4 shell, print nightmare, etc. And now we're bringing in the scan result that says that vulnerability, Log4x, is found by our scanner on your asset, and the asset is a MacBook. is is your NAS, is whatever these services and things are. Hey, guess what? My Apple HomePod is vulnerable. Imagine that. So this is now the base starting point for building the vulnerability response tool in ServiceNow. The first thing we see when we look at a vulnerable item is, in my environment of 50 devices, give or take, most of these are actual nodes or clusters or containers within shared service devices. So 600 vulnerabilities here at home is a little daunting. Imagine an organization that has 2,000 servers and 50,000 workstations. That number is going to be astronomical, and not uncommon to see millions or tens of millions of vulnerable items active, open, viewed, waiting for a response. So there's several things that we do with that. Again, honing in on that being noisy, right? The very first thing we're going to start to do is risk, assign, and set expectation of fix. How do we risk? So there are calculators that will take a look. Did I open the right one? I did. All right, here we go. There are calculators that we can leverage that will start at that vulnerable item, take a look at all those data points and elements that we talked about. The external facing view, the CVSS or severity score, right? Qualys or Rapid7 or tool says it's vulnerable because of X, Y, and Z attributes, or it's critical because of X, Y, and Z attributes. But then also leveraging ServiceNow. Oh, this device is in your CMDB flagged as externally facing. We're going to bump our risk up. It has an exploitability. There's a known exploit. Bump the risk up, so on and so forth, right? Many different factors that we can go to. We can start to talk about posture of the device, relationships within the device. Is the device a part of a critical business service? And this is where service awareness, that CSDM framework and alignment of services, what service, what's the criticality of that service, really start to come in. At a base, right, what we're looking to do is leverage all of that intelligence and known data to tell our responders and tell our organization that this is the vulnerability you really need to look at right now. This is the vulnerability you need to be aware of and you need to look at very quickly, but not as quickly as this other one. So we can condition, we can build these out to every nth way to the sun. It's important here that the organization understands what their risk calculations are and how we're arriving at a score. So we build our vulnerable item risk using known data of the vulnerability and known data of our asset. There are provisions we can do where, as I mentioned, we do track those that are still found in your environment, but not in your CMDB, which is everything I have in here. And we can still leverage that to build out a risk for you. As with anything else in the platform, sort, filter, so on. So I have a risk now. I have my asset, I have my vulnerability, and I have a risk. I have a base framework for a response. From there, I'm going to assign this. Because I have information about the device, because I have information about the type of vulnerability it might be, I build out assignment rules that leverage that. So I've built a couple of demo ones here. First and foremost, we want to get this, the intent to assignment here is visibility and response. We want to get this quickly to the people that are going to be fixing the vulnerability. More often than not, that's going to be the people that support the device. So we leverage CI support group. We could do CI assignment group, an assignment field on that asset or CI. But oftentimes we find that that's a struggle point. That's non-discoverable. That's something that configuration management programs and processes have to maintain over time. And with many customers, we may find inaccuracies or issues with that, or we might find extenuating circumstances such as, yes, we want to leverage the CI support group, but if it's exploitable, we want it to go to a very specific subgroup of response. So we can leverage that. We're going to look here we're looking first to make sure our CI on that vulnerability has a support group, assign it to that. If not, maybe we're going to do IP-based or location-based, etc. Many different conditions we can do. And then we set our assignments. And you'll see two different ways. We can statically set this, or we can leverage field on form, field on table. All right. So we've got now a very good, stellar, awesome, and amazing program built for all of these vulnerable items, but we have too many. Sure, I can come in here and I can say, show me all my criticals, show me all my highs, right? And assign them. But what's going to happen is you're in larger organizations, you might find that you turn this on and you implement this and you set all this up and you literally have just assigned your network team 40,000 things to go fix. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Information overwhelmed there, and alert fatigue is going to set in, and they're just going to look at that and go, yeah, whatever, okay, we'll just fix it on the next patch. And very quickly that becomes exploited, and we now talk about security incident. We don't want that. So what we can leverage is this function of roll-up or grouping. For anybody that's familiar with vulnerability response, prior to the most recent version, that was called vulnerability group. It's now called remediation task, because that's really what we're looking to do. We're going to find common logic across these for common effort to fix, common effort of ownership, and we're going to group it into one single task that you can view, look, and do. Several things that we can leverage. Again, it's the same thing with the risk. It's the same thing with the CI and asset data. We leverage all of that, right? Type of. Is it exploitable? Yes or no? That's going to define the grouping logic. It's a known Windows device, a known network device. It's a network device in a certain environment. Therefore, group these together. Most often, though, we want to talk about grouping these in a way of how are we fixing it? The intent to the group is fix and fix fast. Launching point to fix. So we're not going to put a MacBook that is managed by IBM BigFix with a Windows machine that is managed or remediated by SCCM in the same patching or in the same vulnerability response or remediation task or group. We're going to want that type of logic in here. So we build those rules out. We can see an example here. Again, not to get into how to build the rule, but by function, right? We can group and condition this many, many different ways. I kept this one simple. I'm going to group everything. I'm going to define my what will be grouped as anything I've got, but I'm going to build my groups around the idea of CI class, Windows Server, Linux, network device, etc. I'm going to also build my group around if it's exploitable and who owns it. Simple idea. And then we're going to assign it to whoever has been assigned the vulnerable item. So if you recall, as we've walked this demo, we have somewhere around 600 vulnerabilities in here. Obviously, we see some that have already been remediated or fixed, but we have a lot. But if we take our grouping strategy now, of those 600, we have seven working things to fix. Why? Because all of these have the same fix. We're going to take a look at this one because I've massaged the data for the point of demo, but this particular grouping is my network devices. It's not exploitable. Ignore short description. That's bad demo. This would be adjusted. Default is how our criteria of grouping, but you adjust that for the customer to be more friendly. So essentially, this is telling me we grouped it because we knew about the assignment. These are IP firewalls, and it's not exploitable. So we immediately know something about what this grouping of work is, and we apply a risk rating based on the items that are assigned, and we assign it. We can see here that roll-up function now drives us to responding quickly. All of this was done in an automated fashion. We set up all those rules. So every time we ingest vulnerability data, the asset data, the CI data, the scan results, we build these out dynamically. And now our vulnerability analysts, our support groups and ownerships come in here. They're assigned this task to now resolve. They know this one happens to be low. So in a larger environment, yeah, 600 to 6, that's awesome. You're probably talking millions to thousands in a well thought out grouping strategy. So you're still going to have thousands of vulnerability groups, but these are much easier. From here, I can see this happens to be the same asset, the same device, my core router. I can see that it has all very similar, if not same, vulnerabilities on it. All right, TLS version 1 support. So I probably want to go fix that. That's an easy fix, even though it's a low priority. I'm going to go log into my router. I'm going to deprecate my TLS 1.0 support in there, and I'm going to turn on TLS 3. I'm going to redeploy a certificate, and I fixed this. Cool. So I've done that, right? Several things we can do with this. We can leverage automation, orchestration, orchestration tasks now that would trigger go fix, go do, patch fixing, etc. But you'll also notice that we have the ability here to jump right over to change. It's a long demo to demo the change integration, but the key here is change drives process. I need to go determine impact. I need to see if I need to do this as an emergency or standard change or normal change. Is there downtime? What's my impact across the organization? Awareness across the organization, all that change management flow. We create our change. The vulnerability response and items are reflected. You would see an awaiting implementation of change state. We now defer to change. Change is implemented. It indicates that we have closed or resolved our vulnerabilities. So all of this is awesome and great. But the key thing here is if we recall our life cycle, this is a repeat, right? It's a trust but validate, trust but verify. So what are we doing, right? Our end user base, our assignment base has said that they have fixed or patched or solutioned the fix. But we're going to go right back around and we're going to rely on our scanner. Our scanner, Rapid7, goes and rescans the environment and tells me if each of these are really resolved or fixed. So you'll see that. You'll see that these will move through those varying states based on validation. Closed but validated. And we'll see that idea of waiting on our scanner to tell us. All right. So that's a end-to-end demo, an idea of vulnerability response, tucked in with some of the success factors, right? Understanding the complexities here, that there's a lot to factor. It's important that we understand risk. It's important that we understand what the organization's risk is. We might find organizations that have a more specific risk focus because of their regulation or their industry segment they're in. Healthcare versus FinOps or manufacturing. All are going to have those factors that are all part of factoring risk, ownership, assignment, and response. So we can see that. Tucked in here also is several, and I'm not going to bore, we're all ServiceNow folks in some form or fashion, so I'm not going to drive through all the varying levels of reporting. We all know what it can do. There's a very good base for standard reporting as well as performance analytics reporting, which I do not have active in this environment. So you will see several different views, reports, and dashboards. The important thing to understand here is that the base is there, and we can leverage that to start to show risk factors, what's at risk, what's in process, how well are we doing, how many have we resolved over time, how many high, low, moderate have we resolved over time. All right, so that's vulnerability response. So the natural and easy segue from vulnerability to security incident is where vulnerability response, we're leveraging the idea of scan, find, and resolve before it's exploited. Security incident is or being attempted to be exploited. Think of it that way. So if we go back and we look at one of these vulnerable items, just going to go ahead and reopen this one, you'll notice right on the vulnerable item, we have a create security incident. From a human factor, let's say we're analyzing this and we see indications of active exploit in our environment. So we now are saying, hey guys, initiate your incident response plan for this vulnerability because it's being exploited. So obviously, we still are going to fix our vulnerability, but we're also doing the active portion of this. All right. So because I don't have a fully demoable security incident program set up in my environment here. But by and large, the idea here is we bring over our asset data. This is still important for a security incident. Event is occurring against this device, ransomware on device, malware detected, virus detected, malicious file, some user behavior, user clicked a malicious link, comes in, and we start to build through a process. You'll notice state flow Each of these align to that NIST flow that we talked about here around the detect, analyze, contain, eradicate, recovery, and post. So we're going to drive this through a process. But one of the things that we start to leverage with security incident response is the idea of response flow. You'll hear these called runbooks in the environment. I do not have any, but as an example here, in a security incident response program, what we have done in a mature program is we've categorized security incidents or event types: malicious file, unauthorized access, password compromise, phishing, spam, loss of equipment, theft. Guess what? We even have copyright violation because that can lead to security issues, so on and so forth. So we've categorized these. ServiceNow has done a good job of aligning a lot of these at a parent level to some of the NIST and SANS overall generalized categories. So when we brought this over from security incident, from vulnerability, we brought a categorization in: unpatched vulnerability on a vulnerable application being exploited. We assigned this very quickly based on that categorization or asset data, similar to vulnerability in that role. And we've immediately queued up some analysis. Those runbooks then would define how we respond to this. It's an unpatched vulnerability. So we could talk a knowledge base article that says step 1, step 2, step 3. Was this generated by user clicked link? Yes or no? If yes, right? And what do we do with that? We spin up flow in task. Again, demo. I don't have a lot of these built in here, but we're going to spin up those tasks, and response to those tasks can be internal to your security program or external. Compromised password. Password is compromised by a fellow employee. We're probably going to go to the identity access management team and tell them to disable both user accounts, change passwords, and deprovision some stuff. So that task is assigned, and that task will govern the flow, much like any other response flow. So one of the fun things with this, as we move this generic task through, each of these states indicate what we're doing, right? Contain, eradicate, recover, all within the phase of response lifecycle, making sure that it's not happening anymore, stopping the threat, eradicating it, meaning it's not if it's malware, if the threat has deployed something in our environment, getting rid of the maliciousness. Recovering would also be getting rid of the maliciousness, but on the aspect of restoring old files, restoring backups, getting the business back up and running. And you'll notice that based on these state flows, we govern that process to only allow you to move forward and back between. For security lifecycle, for legality reasons, for threat reasons, we most likely never move back to an analysis state. We are in containment. That means we're already starting to adjust rules, security things, firewalls, getting rid of malware, blocking IP addresses and such. So analysis doesn't make sense and should not be gone back to for various reasons. All right, so we've analyzed this. I intentionally skipped some of the automation and enrichment steps here in the response process. We will show that in a moment. But we've reached the end, right? And we'll notice that we don't go to close. We go to this review state. Why? Post-incident. We want to gather some data from those that responded to this incident. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was, pick me later, lazy development. I'm going to pick sysadmin, and we're going to pick a couple other people here, right? So these people all did something with this incident. So we're going to send them a post-incident response survey, and we're going to ask them to complete it. What does this gather? What does this do for us? Using the assessment and survey engine, we build out questionnaire, right? Based on type of incident. Was there a need for legal? Did we have to involve law enforcement, etc.? So this becomes a archival record, but it also becomes an opportunity in our flow when we talk about, and my deck has now jumped, there we go. When we talk about this loop, back to prepare, and back into that detection. This is the exact state where, based on our gathering of data post-fact, how did we respond? What did we do? Who did we involve? Did we talk with so-and-so, such and such? What is some of that evidence that it was really fixed, right? We can leverage that to now go back to our security team, our tool ownerships, and say, look, okay, we really probably ought to implement X protocol. We probably need to put in multi-factor authentication because the way this thing was compromised was by one single password. So that's what this post-incident review gives us. We will see the varying states, we will see history, but we will also ask for evidence questions. Did you talk to? Did you respond? How did you respond? Was there a financial loss? Some of those types of things. There's a base survey in here, but that is user customizable. Some of it will go to industry. What industry are you in? Are you highly regulated? If you follow financial operations and you're a PCI regulated customer, because you do heavy payment processing. There are things that PCI requires in a security program in order to be PCI compliant and show that you are. So you would gather these as part of your evidence of response. Once this has been completed by those respondents, so we'll fly through one, right? And here's where you get the idea. Each of those phases, and we now are going to respond. And just like any other part of the assessment metric survey platform, interactive, based on, conditions based on, so on and so forth. I don't know which ones or how many of these are required. All right, I just completed it. Do a little trick here and get rid of this user. We're not going to wait on him to fill this out. All right, so our assessment has been completed. And now, can we really consider this to be truly closed? We've gathered our evidence. So one of the nice things with that security incident, on closure, you'll notice here, our response for that post-incident survey is stored and accessible by attachment, where now we can get a historical view. So auditors, regulation, going over to some of the governance and compliance pieces of this. This now starts to show us some of that protocol and program compliance, lessons learned, what did we adjust, what was our issue and delay, so on and so forth. So we've now completed a security incident in our environment, and we have launched post-incident, and we've now gone back to those teams to respond appropriately to adjust our environment and lessen the future state of this happening. All right. The additional pieces to this that I have not necessarily mentioned because it required me switching over here, but also because they're enrichment. At a very baseline, we get the idea here of security incident and vulnerability and what they do. Within security incident response, just like with vulnerability, we will leverage and want to leverage those tools that are out there. So security incident response can ingest events and incidents from other tools like Splunk, like firewalls, Carbon Black endpoint protection, antivirus tools that will report. We can ingest those in various ways. We can do various things via email or otherwise to create those tools or to create those incident records. We can also leverage threat and intelligence within the response cycle if one of these will open up. And I know we're right at time, so I'll show this very quickly, that we can leverage lookbacks and searches. We could send this information or specific indication, IP address that was found, file hash, MD5 hash, et cetera, that was found, to send to other tools, threat tools, enrichment tools, virus total, have I been pwned, augment that data so that now, guess what? On this threat, on this incident, hybrid analysis and virus total both say it's a malicious. I now know I need to respond with more impetus and more priority to this in a slightly different way. We also have things like other enrichment tools like MITRE, where we can see the framework of attack, MITRE in and of itself could take a several hour demonstration to demo because it's a very complex framework. All right. So we've seen the tools. We've seen the two main tools. We've seen how we can, at a very quick glance, how we can leverage enrichment tools like VirusTotal, Have I Been Pwned? We can log search back out to CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, so on, to see where else we've seen this in our environment and respond appropriately. So I know we are right at the 12 o'clock hour. I will open up to brief or quick Q&A. And if we don't have any questions, everybody, I do appreciate your time. Feel free to reach out as always, as you're going through this, or if you have any questions offline, absolutely feel free to shoot it out and I will help correlate response.
Thanks, Aric.